Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frances Wild. I'm an education producer here at the National Gallery of Australia. I was intrigued to learn that our next speaker, Ben Quilty, finds a historic cemetery near his home in Robertson a special place for reflection and renewal, a place to dream and contemplate. In a recent interview, he commented that when he sits in the middle of history, that is the cemetery, he can empathise with those who have gone before and wonder about the future of us all. It is this uncertain future that I'm sure Ben will discuss more with us today. But before I invite Ben to the lectern, I'd like to remind us of some key moments in his career. Ben won the Archibald Prize in 2001 with his portrait of Margaret Olley, and the Doug Moran National Portrait Prize in 2009 with a portrait of Jimmy Barnes. In 2011, he worked as an official war artist for the Australian Defence Forces stationed in Afghanistan, where he depicted the daily life and struggles of Australian soldiers. And his self-portraits after returning are haunting images of the effects of this deployment on the artist's psyche. Ben is widely respected for his compassionate mentoring of Myron, who was incarcerated in a Bali jail, and his campaign to save the lives of both Sukumaran and Andrew Chan. Something to look forward to for us is a major survey of Ben's work titled Quilty, which will open at the Art Gallery of South Australia on the 2nd of March and then travel for a year. I think its second location is the Quagoma. We know that Ben has a big heart, and it was an experience in 2016 when he was invited by World Vision to visit Lebanon, Syria and Greece to witness firsthand the evacuation of Syrian refugees and illustrate the asylum seeker predicament that challenged his capacity to respond visually. It was during this trip that he met a little girl called Hiba, an encounter that affected him profoundly. Please welcome Ben to tell us more about this experience and others in his career. Thank you.
That's me. It's pretty awkward and pretty embarrassing, I have to say, but my lovely guys in my studio put this presentation together and I didn't know which images until just a minute ago. I should go back and thank you for that lovely introduction. Just a bit further, before the Archibald and before being the official war artist through the Australian War Memorial to Afghanistan, back to year 12, and your introductions changed my speech, but I only just made the notes then. It's the best way for me to speak. I actually, in year 12, and I know that you're all in charge of people like that little boy on the left, who become, a few years after, like that strange-looking fellow on the right. I was obsessed with art in high school. Art and drama and English were my things. And at the end of year 10, I had careers advisors, which this is in the late 80s. Hopefully they've become more adept at channeling young people's dreams than this young man was back then. But I said to him, I think I'd like to go to art school. And I'll never forget it, adjusted the glasses on his nose, looked down at the subjects that I was doing and said, I'm going to suggest that you re-enroll in 3-unit economics. And that's no exaggeration, that's exactly what happened. The careers advisor had never heard of anyone going to art school and was not going to change his career at that point and advise someone like me to do that and break his tradition of sending people into banking or finance or whatever it is you do at the end of a 3-unit economics studies at high school. So I kept studying. By year 12, I duxed year 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 in visual art. And I duxed English in 8, 9, 10. But by year 11 and 12, I was pretty out of control. I was at a Catholic boys' school, very, very violent year 7. At the end of year 7, New South Wales government outlawed corporal punishment. The brothers still wore the straps on the backs of their belt, but weren't allowed to use them on us. And no one thought to explain to the boys that it had, as a 12-year-old, that's how old I was, what it meant to stop strapping you, that we're now legally not allowed to hit you anymore. By year 11 and 12, I was obviously pretty set on rebelling against every single authority figure. But having duxed every year of high school art, I then told my family that I wanted to go to art school, and my parents nearly shit themselves. My dad had always said that if you do what you love, you'll be successful no matter what. And we could do any subjects we wanted, except that we had no choice about doing debating. And I was the eldest of 3 boys. And when Dad said that to us at dinner, my middle brother said, "Dad, you always told us that if we do what we love, we'll be successful." And I said, "Yeah, Dad, what did you mean by that?" And he said, "Well, I thought you'd do something in the law." Having not studied legal studies once through the whole of high school, I was very puzzled by that. But I think it goes some way, and I'm speaking to the converted, some way to explain the society's anxiety about children going to art school, going to drama school, going to film school, going to anything in the creative industries school, full stop. So I made 2 bodies of work. It's funny, I was the 3-unit arts ambassador in New South Wales, and as far as I know, I still am the 3-unit arts ambassador. They didn't tell me that they'd actually cut 3-unit arts. What the fuck is with that? Excuse the language. And I have a lot of fights to fight. That is one fight I'm going to have with them. Not yet, but when I get my shit together. So I did two units. Obviously, I had 2 units of practical and 1 unit of theory. One at the Catholic boys' school, I made an Aboriginal crucified on a cross with his guts dribbling out all over the ground, and in those guts are all his spirits. I didn't really know what I was thinking, and I hadn't really thought through what that symbolism meant at this Catholic school, and it did quite well, funnily enough. The second work I made literally the night before. No VAPD, no nothing. It was a self-portrait looking at, and I don't want you to tell any of your students this, it's not funny. I don't tell this story to any students. The course reader had a Miro in it, and I'd spent a bit of time, not a lot, I didn't spend a lot of time studying much at that period of my life, a bit of time trying to understand Miro. So in the self-portrait was me looking very confused, painted in a mirror in my mum and dad's bedroom, with the Miro painting on the easel instead of the self-portrait. When I got in, Miss Nini and Miss Formanek, my art teachers, who I'll love till the day I'm dead, they're the only reason I went on to art school, said, "Ben, we have no choice but to fail you for that unit. There's no VAPD. That's half the mark. You're gone. You start off with that painting, you get half the marks. If you get 100%, you'll still fail." Well, they marked it at the Art Express. It got into Art Express. And it actually got 50 out of 50, so I didn't fail. And Miss Formanek just shook her head and said, "You're ridiculous." Well, they changed the rules about that as well. So it turns out now, in New South Wales, I wouldn't pass because with the VAPD, they won't let you through. And you won't get into Art Express without that, which I also is another lesser important argument than resuscitating 3-unit art. When I then went into art school at the end of year 12, I said, there's nothing I want to do except either be an actor or be an artist. If you say, what do you want to do to a child? What do you really want to do? There's not many of them who are going to say they want to work in a bank. Really, there's not. They're doing it because their parents feel they should, because there's an expectation that you need to be really rich, that you need to follow in this path that is all about capitalism in the end. And it was very clear to me back then that I didn't really even agree with capitalism, let alone understand what GST was in 300 economics. So I went to art school in 1992, and it was Sydney College of the Arts. I was the first one to go to university, but my parents said it has to be a university art course. They had no idea why, but they said, you've got to go to university. And Sydney Uni's got the best name, so we think you should apply for that. So I did the audition at NIDA as well. You had to learn 4 pieces. I think it speaks to some point about who I was at 18, that I thought I was good enough to only learn 1 piece. So I learnt the Faustus, and I did it. I did it fucking brilliantly. And then they said, and now you're Shakespeare. And I said, no, I don't have that. And then went very awkwardly through the next two pieces. No, I don't have that either. And they said, you'll hear from us. And I'm still waiting to hear from them. But I then got into Sydney College of the Arts. Back then, there was 9 university art schools in New South Wales. There's now 2 left. And the Rudd-Gillard government, some years ago, cut all TAFE funding for visual arts courses. So now all your students, if they live anywhere, Newcastle had a fantastic art school, University of Western Sydney had a sensational art school, they were everywhere, they're all gone. To say that the visual arts is in crisis at the moment, I think is a massive understatement. It's no wonder they cut 300 art, because, I mean, you could be paranoid enough to think that they don't want us to go on and study art, or, as I've learnt more rationally, visual arts study at university per square metre is the most expensive course besides ag science. So Sydney Uni has cut their ag science and half the size of Sydney College of the Arts. So when I say there's only 2 university art schools left, 3, Sydney Uni is half what it was when I was there. But that's not where I was going to start this talk, but the introduction sort of led me down that track. And forgive me if I wander a bit, just clap your hands and I'll get back on point. In the Italian Renaissance, you know how people always say, and it was only a few years ago that I was bold enough to say I'm an artist when I was introduced. What do you do? I'm a landscaper, a tiler, a TV editor, a waiter, a kitchen hand, a druggo, many, many things. But to be brave enough in our community to be a young man or a young woman and say you're an artist is a very tricky thing. And it was my art teacher, Murray Formanek, who told me that in the Italian Renaissance, all children could draw spectacularly. Like most professional artists, at the end of their tuition, if you're lucky enough to have an education, you learn, besides philosophy, mathematics, physics, Latin, you also learn how to draw. So when people say, I can't draw a stick figure, I can't draw a straight line with a ruler, you never hear people in Europe say, I can't draw a straight line without a ruler. There's a fascination with it. People, and I forgive them, don't realise how offensive it is to say I can't draw a straight line without a ruler. It's not some magical talent. It's something that you have to work really hard for, and I would argue you have to work much harder for it than you do if you work in a bank. So I realised then at that point that if all children could draw, then everyone can draw, which means that the harder you work at it, the better you become. And it was the first time I truly dedicated myself to something, but I'd actually done it much earlier than that. My parents said, you never burn fossil fuels for fun. That was one of their key mottos. We grew up on the northwestern outskirts of Sydney, in kind of semi-rural, dysfunctional sort of a part of Sydney at that point. And lots of the boys had motorbikes. And I remember in about year 6 thinking, if I can draw a motorbike, it's as cool. The boys are fascinated. I made money from drawing motorbikes for a while there. And I remember and this is right off, I had lovely handwriting. And I loved handwriting. It's a beautiful thing to do. I remember walking into the headmaster's office thinking, why have I been called into the headmaster's office? Always thinking I've done something wrong. And he had about 30 letters on his table in my handwriting. Dear Mrs. Brown, John's really sick today and can't come to school. And he said, did you do this? I said, no, brother, I didn't. He said, okay, on your way, and let me go. Who knows what? He just probably loved the handwriting, I assume. So, to the beginning of my talk, talking about the Italian Renaissance and children being able to draw, that everyone can learn to draw. And later in this talk, I'll talk about Myron Sukumaran, who learnt to draw and make extraordinary paintings in 4 years, and he's an adult. So when my dad, a few years ago, who's in his 70s, I said to Dad, why don't you start painting? He said, oh, I'm much too old for that. Emily Ingleworry started painting when she was 72, and she dominated the world. And in my opinion, she's the best painter to ever come out of this country. So I was travelling with Richard Flanagan. He rang me up and said, will you come to the Middle East with me? I've been invited by World Vision It was under Tony Abbott's government that our foreign aid budget was cut in half, almost exactly to the dollar. We paid 21 cents in $100 for all our foreign aid. And when you consider our neighbours like Papua New Guinea, Fiji, our area, let alone what's happening in the rest of the world, we pay a third of what the UK pays in foreign aid, a third of it. And World Vision, at that point, what happens when foreign aid is cut, the NGOs have to start doubling their efforts. And they're not really trying to argue with governments, they're just peddling as fast as they can. And particularly, from my tour with Richard Flanagan, was to provide education for children in Syrian camps of Syrian children who'd fled Syria during that war. Richard rang me up and said, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "Absolutely, I'm there, let's do it." I'd been to Afghanistan, and one of the pertinent questions that I always found was why have you not told the story of the Afghan people? And sometimes it's asked in an accusatory sort of way. There is always an undercurrent of mistrust of the War Memorial's role of sending artists to make work in war zones. I think there's mistrust of artists more broadly in Australia, but it definitely comes out, and I saw it very keenly after I'd been to Afghanistan. Even though almost every artist that I know who's been sent, and historically, except during the Vietnam War when there was quite a conservative right-wing director at the War Memorial, apart from that, all of them, you look at Streeton's paintings of the Battle of the Somme, all of them go to the heart of the horror of war. And they're a reminder that lasts a lot longer than newsprint about those wars. But I couldn't answer that question. I could say, look, I had no chance, it's too dangerous for me to walk off into a village. I was with the Australian Defence Force, and I was actually there to tell the story of those young men and women, and the youngest was 18 years old. I met him in Tarin Kot, and by the time 12 months had come round at the end of his deployment, he'd attempted suicide 3 times. There was a big story to tell in the men and women that I met there. But this felt to me like a perfect way to bookend that tour to Tarin Kot, to Kabul, Kandahar, and Kabul, Kandahar and Tarin Kot, to go and meet these people. I marched across the Harbour Bridge, and I must admit that my mum kind of forced me to do it against the invasion of Iraq, and now I'm very happy I did, because in my understanding of contemporary world politics, that was the greatest strategic mistake in our modern history. It led to this child living in absolute poverty in the northern part of Lebanon, having crossed out of Syria 6 years before. He'd been working as a farm labourer, this little boy, and through an interpreter I asked him how long he'd been a farm labourer, and the interpreter looked at me and said, he doesn't understand that question. He doesn't remember not being a farm labourer. So there was nothing before. That's what he does. I met NGOs there who were fighting to end child labour like this, where if this little boy stopped labouring, his mother at home, their father had been killed in the war, his mother at home with 2 smaller children would starve. He was making money to support his family, and it instantly made me realise how complex that is, and how that NGO, who are very wealthy Americans, was such a simplistic, sloganistic and unrealistic answer to this little boy's life. When I gave this little boy a pencil, he took the pencil in his hand and he looked at it, and I instantly knew if you hand someone a pencil, they hold the pencil in a very specific way that to all of us here is perfectly normal and perfectly natural, and I don't think you'd find one human in the 22 million Australians that wouldn't take that pencil in that specific way. He took the pencil and he had never seen a pencil in his life. And I had to turn his hand on its side and push the pencil across the top of the paper in a straight line, and I saw his face completely change. And then his head went down and he did not stop until he'd finished this drawing. And I asked him, "What is it?" And he said, "That's the bus that brought me from Syria into Lebanon some years before." So how did I get on to this? I was with Richard, and Richard was there to write for a World Vision piece for The Guardian in London. And World Vision was willing to get the story out anywhere they could to try and reignite empathy and compassion in us first world people, to give a little more than 21 cents in our $100, to give money, and really particularly to go beyond government and go to the people and say, we need help. And I was there as Richard's illustrator. Well, I'm not a great illustrator because it's really, really hard to do that in a refugee camp. They're often quite dangerous, risky areas, very, very cold areas. But it was there that I was with a little girl. In the introduction you heard about this little Heba. And I asked her to draw her home. And she'd been drawing pretty orange trees and little rainbows and pretty houses, and I asked her to draw her home through an interpreter, and she looked at me with that intense gaze that some little 6-year-olds that have seen too much can do. And she put her head down, and the drawing is coming up. She drew a little house that had been destroyed, an Apache attack helicopter, 3 barrel bombs and 2 little bloody bodies beside the house. And I realised that there was nothing more that I could do. There was nothing that I could do that wasn't in that drawing. And in some senses, she is the storyteller. And I realised when I got home that the best thing I could do for these children and for that experience and to give me some closure was to facilitate these children drawing. I had some years before, when we were living in Sydney, a friend of mine had asked me, he's a plumber in Western Sydney, and he'd asked me that he could not understand his 15-year-old daughter was cutting herself and really suffering. And I've noticed, it seems to me that there's a problem with young women and self-harm, but that's another battle that I don't even close to have my head around. And I asked her, I said to him, send her, bring her to the studio, she loves to draw. Send her to the studio, spend a week in the studio, and she became a great model, sitting and talking about her pain and what was going on in her head and why she felt this way. But she told me that her school, not the art department, but someone in the executive or higher up in the school had confiscated her drawing book because she'd been drawing pictures about self-harm. And I contacted the school, and the art teacher said, yes, I completely agree with you, can you please talk to our headmaster? And I did, and I said, would you rather that she draws the pictures or that she cuts them into her own arm? And that experience for me, I then went further through it and got help from other arts counsellors, and a therapist that I've seen myself after Myron died asked, is this the right thing? Is this what it should be? One of the questions, funnily enough, only in Australia was, haven't you taken advantage of these children? But all I did was gave them the best paper, the best pencils, and said, draw whatever you want. Draw your home, draw the way you remember your home, or draw what you hope for your home. That was the 3 things that we ended up coming up with. And they constantly fitted, fitted the drawings in. Some are hopeful, some are dark. All are incredibly powerful. And all of, when I asked, finally then got enough drawings together, we ended up collecting thousands of these drawings, and I did workshops all around the Middle East. Asked a publisher, it was actually Richard's publisher, and they said yes, and they then rang me back and said, we're going to do it for nothing, our designer's going to do it for nothing, and we're going to get it printed at cost, and all the money goes back to the schools that these children lived in. It made me realise that there is no better. Firstly, there's no better. This is an international language, and I'd argue that as children, my children understand every single symbol and every single drawing, and they don't understand each other's spoken language at all. But it is an international language. Whereas if you have a Chinese artist draw, or me draw, or Ai Weiwei draw, all those drawings have lost this innocence, this honesty, primarily this lack of propaganda, which I think ends up infiltrating all of our media and is really good for them. The thing I noticed about them all, there's only 2 children in over 1,500 drawings, 2 children that I think already had, from my very basic understanding of it, had real trauma. And luckily for me, I was with World Vision, had access to all these therapists, and said, that little boy there has something wrong with him, I know it, I can see it in his face. There's something haunting him, and all the rest of the children were filled with this optimism that's incredibly life-affirming. That's Heber's drawing there. And when she drew that, well, I guess it changed the course of my trip, and it definitely set out for this project to happen, which is called Home. And that's little Heber there, having just drawn the drawing. That's her cousin on her right. When I first got, this is in Serbia, it was minus 20 degrees. I've never felt that sort of temperature, but it was very still and a clear blue day. And I had cancer, and you know the beautiful French handmade paper, which is what I use, and the good quality watercolour pencils. And I stopped, and by then I'd got into a habit of Richard interviewing people who had faced unimaginable terror and sorrow and hardship, and I'd take the children away to give Richard a break so that he could interview. And it was that day that Heber drew that I realised there is something here for me, and that these children can illustrate Richard's story. But before that, her cousin had got his piece of $5 Canson water paper and turned it into an aeroplane. Now, it's the most expensive paper aeroplane ever made. And before 5 minutes was up, there's about 30 of them flying around the Serbian sky. There's got to be a better way. And that's when little Heber took over and drew that drawing. So on to Myron. I get asked all the time if I would mentor people, and it's often young students. And I only take it from my own experience, and possibly I had lost too much respect at that point in my life to ask an authority figure, in my case an artist, a practicing artist, to ask them for any help, let alone a mentorship, was just not ever in my head. And I do really believe that because of the dire straits that TAFEs are gone and art schools are also gone, that you guys are now it. And that the skills they learn, and I really firmly believe that it's skills that children need, because your visual language as an artist is all in here. You can't teach someone a visual language, you can only give them the skills to find their own. And when you think that every person harbours their own visual language somewhere deep inside them, by, I don't know, forgive me if I'm wrong, by 12, every child has their own personal visual handwriting. And I think there's no reason that children, if you guys were better funded and art was given a higher priority in schools, would have their visual language down pat by 12 as well. Imagine the powerhouse, visual, cultural powerhouse we would be if children were given that opportunity. But Myron asked me not to mentor him, but asked me questions about medium. Now, I have lots of young people ask me to mentor them, and I often throw the question back, what materials are you using, what medium do you use? And if they haven't got that far down the track, then I'm not the one. I feel that I need people who are like Myron, who are ready to run 100 miles an hour, because I am so time poor, I just can't give time to every single person who asks. But when I asked Myron, I answered his email and told him, and it showed to me that he had gone, quite extraordinary email to open from a prison, and this group of people that I had no idea about except through the lens of the media. He asked questions that showed me that he had gone a long way down the practice of trying to work out how to paint without an art school, without even an arts education. His parents wanted him to work in a bank, and he was studying finance when he was arrested. So I told him what to do, and then I said, and what's more, who's teaching you? And he said, we have some people, but they're not actually qualified, they're just on holidays in Bali and they like to come in and help, which is very kind, but they weren't artists, they had no visual arts training, education, they were just trying to do anything they could to make these people's lives a little easier. And I gave him an exercise. He was painting, ripping out good Women's Weekly pages, Vogue pages of celebrities. Brad Pitt, he showed me a Brad Pitt. It was a shocker. And I said, Myron, and I wrote to him and said, Myron, I'm not really interested in Brad Pitt, but I'm definitely interested in you. And I think a portrait of you is far more interesting and engaging for me as an audience than a painting of Brad Pitt that you've made from someone else's photograph. of a man that you really have not very much in common with. And he did. I said, make one a day. Make one a day, and in 2 weeks' time, let's reassess. I said a month. And in 2 weeks, Julian McMahon, Myron's barrister, rang me from Melbourne and said, I don't know what you've done, but I'm going to send you a photo. And Myron had made 46 self-portraits in 2 weeks, covering his cell wall. I said, I'm in. If someone is willing to put that much effort into their practice, I don't care how old they are going to become an artist. It's as simple as that. Everyone I went to art school with who had that drive, every single one of them lives off their practice now, to different degrees. But none of us started out for money, so none of us care how much we have, as long as we have enough to get food and pay a bill. It gets tricky when you have kids, obviously, but that's not for here. So Myron, I went over and started working with him. And really, what I learned, and I learned as much from Myron as he learnt from me, is if you want to do it, and if you have a drive to do it, then you will do it, and it will happen. And in every class, in every school, there was two of us in my art class in Year 12. 2 of us went on to go to art school. And funnily enough, both of us went to Sydney Uni because our parents said that's the best uni and had no idea about art school. All of the people that I went to art school with who had that dedication went on to become practicing artists. The day that Myron was executed, his brother had said, Myron's going to ring you up. The guards are going to give him a few phone calls on his last day, amongst other things. And I recognised the prefix of Indonesia and I answered the phone and he said, is that the second best artist in Australia? And people think that how would any of his family or his supporters survive a friend being killed like that? But it's because I'm an artist, and it's because he left this extraordinary body of work made against all the odds. Right up till the end, there was a lot of people who wanted him dead too in Australia, which is to the heart of the sickness in our country, and all the more reason for more people to make art to try and work out why. After all, I have met 1 or 2 very right-wing artists, but on the whole, we're humanists, we're interested in human beings. In the weeks leading up to Myron's execution, I was sent a letter, and it was chopped out newsprint, and in that letter it said, we know where you live, and named my children, and there's a bullet with your name on it coming for supporting that drug-dealing scum, something like that. But I'd been in the prison with Myron, and Myron, every time he opened the mail, I was there one day and his mail arrived. He had to pay for his mail to get into the prison. And he said, you can open it for me. And I had no idea. Why would you not want to open your own mail when you were in that predicament? And then half of those letters to him, and this is 2 years before he was killed, were from people in Australia saying, you drug-dealing scum, you deserve to die. But Myron had risen so far above that white noise by making art. And that's why the children in Syria, I just knew in my heart, there was nothing better for them than to make drawings about the experiences they'd had. Without me being prescriptive, you can't say to a child, draw your brother's death. If that child wants to draw their brother's death, they're going to draw it. And they did. Their parents' death, their siblings' death, their uncles' deaths, their town's destruction, their school's destruction, their school buses' destruction, in the same way that Myron got through an abominable situation by making paintings. So, and I know this conference had topics around empathy and compassion. Visual arts is compassion. It's harnessing, understanding, developing and inquiring about compassion. And really, in the end, all art forms are a reflection of us. They're about being human. And inevitably and interlinked into that is all the ideas around empathy, compassion and sympathy, about understanding other human beings, about trying to find a better way forward. And I think even up till recently, I was even thinking that we're normal, that Australians are normal. I mean, I've never believed... I remember Tony Abbott saying, and I hate to keep bringing up his name, but he's kind of recent and said some pretty wild shit. he said that we're not a racist country. Well, you try being a little Asian boy in my son's school in Mittagong, or try being an Aboriginal boy in a school in North Sydney, or try being anything different in any school. You all know that. And those children have an instant way to start to come to terms with those things. It wasn't lost on me, and I didn't use this, but Myron was Sri Lankan and Andrew was Vietnamese. And there was one other boy who was arrested with them, who everyone in Australia was always saying, oh, he's such a good kid. He was the only one with criminal charges, and one of them was a very violent criminal charge. But everyone was saying, he's fine, he's good. If Myron and Andrew weren't Vietnamese and Sri Lankan, I think things would have been very different for them, and I actually think it would have been much harder for Jacowi to execute them. But that's got nothing to do with this talk either. I guess that's one of the last paintings that Myron made. I do think that self-portraiture for me is the instant way in for any student, for any young artist starting out, to turn a mirror on yourself. And for me, the key thing that Miss Murray Formanek did for me in about year 10, when we walked into the classroom, and it was peace. That art room was the peaceful place, and I know that a lot of you will have students who find your art rooms the peace, the haven in a school that is designed to kind of institutionalise us into fitting into the capitalist world. And most of you will be inquiring, and possibly a lot of the other students who don't study art will think you're all fucking freaks. Well, they think I was too, because I used to always hang out there in the art rooms. But turning the mirror on yourself, and back to Murray Formanek, she set up a table with a pot plant. She always had a beautiful pot plant on her desk. It was sitting in the middle of a table. It had a chalk duster, a box of chalk, a plant with drooping over the edge, and we sat in a circle around those tables that she'd set up, and all we did for the next few weeks was draw that and then make a painting of that. And it's the first time I had instruction really in what art was, and it's about looking, and it's about responding, and it's about hand-eye coordination. And there's so many people in my community that try and overcomplicate it, in my art community, that talk about visual practice and talk about conceptual theory, and at the end of the day, even for photographic film, Sean Gladwell and I were at art school together. He went to Venice with video art. At the end of the day, it's about hand-eye coordination, whether it's through a camera, making a sculpture. It's about that practice of drawing, and to have that practice of drawing becomes the fundamental thing for all other forms of contemporary art. And Myron turned the mirror on himself, and all your students can do the same. It's also, and for those of you who have done it, after an hour of looking at yourself in the mirror, you start to see the whole of humanity in a very distinctly disturbing way. We're really weird. We have no hair on our face. What's with that except a bit here, and I have none there. I mean, you point that out to students. Start to really sit outside yourself and look at yourself from the outside, and start to objectify yourself, to really see yourself as a form and an object that is worthy, particularly those kids. And I only asked my son, who's 12, last week, tell me some of the contemporary music you're listening to. And he's 12, and I didn't know. I mean, I'm a big music fan. He saw Mumford and Sons with me on Friday night, and he said he named a whole lot of musicians. XXXTentacion. Does anyone know that music? All your students are listening to it. And I've now spent a lot of time listening to it, and he's genius. He died at 21. His message was all about anti-depression and looking after yourself and being strong and standing up for who you are. And then he killed himself, which is sort of terrible, but a lot of them in that industry seem to. But to turn them to realise that they are at the cutting edge of all contemporary music, of contemporary culture. They are at the coalface at that age, and I was. Guns N' Roses released Appetite for Destruction. Nevermind was released by Nirvana. AC/DC released Highway to Hell, and Brother Luke said, if you listen to that, you're going to go to hell. And he was serious, and I thought, oh, wow, this is a fucking good album. And now your kids are having that experience now. For me to look back and tell my son that when I was 16 that Nevermind was released and he has listened to that album, Joey, you tell me now what you're listening to. What is the album that in 25 years' time you'll tell your son that was the most important album of my life? And it's about them. They are there, and a mirror is all they need to start to make drawings and to look. Not all kids are going to be driven to it, but it's the opportunity to give those children that will go on to become the future visual arts ambassadors, I guess. Not 300 art ambassadors, that's gone, but... so that's about it. I thought we have some time, 10 minutes for questions. If anyone... Oops, sorry. If anyone has any questions. Not about VAPDs.
Just a reminder, everybody, that Slido is working again now as well, so that's where you submit your question. But there are a few here already. One is not a question so much as an acknowledgement of the inspiration you gave one of my students, also named Ben, to get interested in art, and now he's at uni studying
Good
art,
work, Ben.
studying the visual arts. Okay. Comment, thanks Ben, an honest and insightful talk. How would you describe Myron's visual language?
Oh, Myron's visual language is my visual language. I taught him, I sat next to him and said, why, I mean, it's never tuition like this, but I would be there for 2 days and I would sit down, and I knew his time could be limited. I never actually thought they were going to execute him, but his time was limited and he was under a lot of pressure in so many different directions. So I would sit with him, teach him about a palette, say, why are you mixing more purple in there? Why are you mixing black with that? Can't you find another way? Black is the easiest thing to delete from a palette. No student should ever use black. It's a killer of paintings. And there's no such thing as black. If you teach students that black doesn't exist, and now the best physicists in the world say there's no black in a black hole. There is no black. It's purple and dark green, dark red. There's so many, and as soon as they stop using black and start mixing different shades of dark, the paintings come alive. But I sat with Moran and literally taught him how to paint. And we were just starting to have conversations about the notion of visual language when he was executed, that he now had to break my tuition and find his own visual language. So his works are very much everything, leaving the white. I told him that this scraping off thing was lazy and he shouldn't do it, because I used to do it when I was at art school. If the painting was bad, you just scrape it off and everyone goes, whoa, deep. It's not really that deep, it's just a bad painting. So yeah, that's to answer you. Myron's very much one-on-one tuition, which never happens. But he was such an extraordinary guy, and it was such an amazing experience for me to be a part of that end of his life that I was willing to give him all the tuition I could.
Okay, another question is, how do you help young people get over the fear of making a self-portrait?
Ooh. Yeah, I guess, well, look, school classroom's a really tricky place to do any art. A studio should be on your own. Share studios have never worked for me. You should make stuff, well, no, what the education departments around, the federal education, Mitch Fifield, should give you all enough money that every student has their own studio and then they can do what they want. It's really hard, obviously. You're sitting, children, and the ones that probably should be making the self-portraits are going to be the ones with the least self-confidence and therefore affected most directly by the louder kids who probably won't pay attention anyway. So I think you should, like my teacher encouraged me to come in at lunch, and I loved it. And there was a couple of us in there and we'd be drawing and talking and probably mucking up a bit too, but it was a safe space. It's a good question and it's a hard thing to teach, but if they know they can do it, I think in Art Express, a big, bold self-portrait is really going to stand up, in my opinion, if I was a judge.
There was a question and now it's disappeared.
Maybe we could go old school.
That's right. It was a very interesting question actually, because it It was about the lack of contemporary artists studied in the school system, and who would you choose for students to study?
Really, is there?
That's what the, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know anything about the syllabus, I have to admit, because they cut 3 units so they can fuck off.
I guess at the core there, who would you choose?
Well, there's so many. Del Catherine Barton, you all would know Del. She's an old friend, and I don't think in my life, maybe ever, in Australia has there been one single artist who's had more effect on more people to copy that style. And when I get some young woman saying, "Will you mentor me?" and sends me through 10 bad Del Catherine Bartons, I'm like, oh my God, Del, you have a lot to answer for. But Del obviously strikes a chord, and it's funny how much she polarises the audience, and I have to say the cynical side of me thinks it's because she's a female, because I think, how can you criticise a practice like that? She's extraordinary, and she taps straight into something that particularly young women pick up and want to make work like, and she's a painter. Then Sean Gladwell and his skateboard videos, I mean, how it's so simple and so honest. And if you haven't seen Stormfront, the video shot down at Bondi, every kid who's even mildly interested in that street culture should watch that video to see what video art is, that it's not masks and complex edits, it's one straight piece of honest footage about him. It's a self-portrait of him, with all the troubles that he faced growing up in Carlingford in Western Sydney. It's got everything about him. That's Sean. That you get a sense of him by watching him skate in front of a storm on Bondi. It's such a simple idea. Fiona Lowry, there's a huge list of them. Internationally, I think Dana Schutz is one of my favourite painters at the moment. Schutz, Dana. Adrian Genie, I think, is extraordinary, Ghenie. Although I actually try not to look too much, because I end up making paintings and it's inevitable that I think that's just an Adrian Genie. So the less I look now, the better. But for students, and they should know that too, they've got to find their own visual language. They really do. It's in every single one of us. You have to, Adrian Genie, Dana Schutz, Sean Gladwell, Del Catherine Barton. Del found it herself. She didn't look at someone else and copy them and become Del. She did it herself. And that's the key to a visual arts practice. So I know you've got to have something to study and you have to look at other things. I almost think it's worth, if a student loves to paint, they should be extending themselves and looking at installation, and it'll only empower their painting.
Katie, there's a question over just on the right side there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ben. My name's Isabella, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your association with Margaret Olley.
Margaret was, people say Margaret was my mentor, which I guess she was in a way. She showed me the first time someone who lived as an artist, but she was pretty bossy. She wasn't really constructive about my painting, like my grandma wasn't, I guess. Same sort of relationship. But she was an extraordinary human, a powerful, powerful lady. And I'd studied feminist theory at University of Western Sydney because I'd been going to bucks parties and head weddings. I mean, who goes out the night your baby's born and gets blind? Australian men do. All of those, and I was so confused by it and questioning it and being a part of it that I went and studied feminist theory at Western Sydney. At the same time, I was studying a Bachelor of Design to get a job because I was unemployable at the end of my visual arts degree. Don't tell the students that. And when I told Margaret that I'd studied feminist theory, she said, why would you do that? And I said, what did you think when the feminist movement started, Margaret? And she said, I don't know why they hadn't thought of it years before. And it's true, she was just innately, intuitively self-confident. Saying that was 48 years after she'd given up alcohol. And from everything I've read and the conversations I had with her, she was very shy and really lacking confidence when she drank herself almost to death as a young woman. But by the end of her life, a powerfully self-confident lady. And she'd broken down all that hierarchy. There was no one. In fact, Nick Mitzovich, who's the director of this gallery now, I hope Nick's not here, can you not tell him that I told you this story? He and I were at Margaret's house many years ago, and Edmund Capon was there. Edmund's a very serious, elegant old man, like most of the museum directors, except Nick now. And I got up to start clearing the table, and it's Nick Mitzovich, who was the director of the, at that time, Newcastle Art Gallery, and Edmund Capon, the director of the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And I got up to start clearing the table, and she said, "Sit down, Edmund, clear the table." I thought, I like this lady. And then I said, I really want to help Margaret. It's Edmund Capon. She said, "Will you go and get the dessert?" So I went into the fridge and got out a lemon tart and opened the lid, and it was covered in mould. So I went back to Margaret and said, "Margaret, there's mould all over the citron tart." And she said, "Put it in the microwave for 20 minutes. 20 seconds, it'll be fine." It's like, here you go, Edmund. Nick, there's mould on this. And so Nick ate the pastry bit. And while he was eating the pastry bit, he started choking. And he'd swallowed one of Margaret's hairs, and Margaret had hair. So, and seriously, if you see him out there, ask him. He's the only person I know that ate a part of Margaret Olley. What was your question again?
Okay, maybe this is an interesting one about your work in ceramics recently. So the delegate saw the ceramic work at SAM in Shepparton, and while your paintings are usually quite sculptural, how did you find working with clay?
Well, I had a book of Rodin when I was a kid. I think Rodin in black and white is a great thing for students to see. The sculptural forms of Rodin are fabulous to draw from. Auerbach and Kossoff and Lucien Freud, none of those artists would have come without Rodin's incredible three-dimensional forms. And I'd been looking at those and trying to do that, and I tried to make a Rodin myself, and it was a terrible, bad thing. But it is a beautiful medium, and as an artist, I've made... Oh no, there's Nick. Oh, it's good. Did you just get here? Oh, it's fine. Oh no, this has really put me off. Well, thanks for having me, everyone. What were we talking about? Shepparton, yeah. So working with clay, I think once you have a practice, it's, you know, at art school I felt we were really kind of rigidly put into groups and painting or drawing or film or sculpture, and they're all part of a practice. And you'd be mad not to try using film and using everything. And digital technologies plays such a huge part in our lives now. Be crazy as any artist not to use it. Del Catherine Barton's made some extraordinary films. And clay is an easy thing to have in the studio. It has really direct links, I think, visually, and the tactile nature of it to the way I make paintings. And if you use Play-Doh, actually Guy Maestri told me a recipe to make Play-Doh, which was amazing, and it's cheap and it's pliable and it stays in that form, and unlike clay, which dries and cracks, you don't have to keep it moist, or oil-based clay. So those works that you ask about were actually old jugs, you know, the washstand, the big jug with the... I have a friend who collects antiques, Luke Scaveris, he's an artist in Hill End, and I'd seen one of those. I said, "That's a beautiful thing, why don't you have one of those?" And he explained what it was, that it was actually a toilet that people had under the bed, therefore they're $50, and if that was a vase, it'd be $1,000 of a 120-year-old object and vessel. So it was about the form and function and the funny conundrum that a washstand has for itself. And I took the drawings, actually Leonardo da Vinci's drawings of people with facial deformities, and then moulded those with oil-based clay onto the front of the washstands that I'd bought in second-hand stores in Bathurst, and then cast them and poured them in porcelain. So they went from a very cheap form of ceramics and became porcelain, which is the finest, one of the finest forms of porcelain. Nick, do you want to come and say something? I just told them about you eating Margaret Olley.
We're getting close to the finish, but maybe this is an interesting time to ask this question with Nick, because Nick's just entered the room. But this final question, a comment was made this morning during a workshop about the potential of the visual arts to stimulate dialogue about the big issues. How can we make this happen?
Well, you just have to make artists. And we'll do it. We continue to do it. That's what art is. Walk anywhere around the museum and see what's in here. They're all making works. Particularly, I think the important role for Australian artists is to unpick taboos about Indigenous history, about gender bias and gender roles and the inequality of gender roles, about the environment. It's endless. For a student, though, at your students' ages, and particularly approaching their major work in year 11 and 12, I think it's too much to ask. And my work talks about some of these ideas, but there's a show which Nick actually first asked me to have at the Archibald South Australia, and it's over 20 years that you start to be able to see those threads and that curators can write about those ideas. To expect a student to make one work that has any of those ideas in it, I think is unfair and unreasonable to the student. And that's why I say that first step of turning a mirror on themselves, not only metaphorically, but literally turning a mirror on themselves, is a really powerful way to show them that they're important, which is an important thing for those people to feel, and to then inevitably reflect the way they feel about the world, even if it isn't instantly recognisable to the audience. Because for an artist, if I had to make one painting that said any of those things, it would be impossible and unfair. I have years to make those works, and then the threads are pulled through many years of practice.
We might leave it there. Ben, thank you. Thank you so much. You're almost a local. Thank you.